The outer sectors of the Orion Arm learned long ago to obey the warlords. Civilizations that resisted didn't burn, they vanished. Planets sterilized, populations erased, culture reduced to static in galactic records. When the warlords passed judgment, they didn't send fleets. They sent the hunters, 6 apex killers engineered across generations, tailored to exterminate any species, anywhere. No world had survived more than 6 days once the hunters were deployed. Not until Earth. The order came after what the warlords called the insolence. A Terran ambassador had insulted one of the warlords during peace negotiations. An accidental offense, perhaps a misused gesture or mistranslated phrase, but it didn't matter. The warlord Khazal had lost face before his peers. He didn't shout. He didn't send diplomats. He simply said, "Send the 6." They arrived 3 days later, riding individual dropships forged from neutron-forged alloys, slicing through Earth's orbital defenses without notice. Each touched down in different regions, targeting key command and political centers. Washington, Brussels, Beijing, New Delhi. There were no demands, no negotiations, only blood. The first strike came at 2:44 Universal Time Coordinated. President Brennan's motorcade was reduced to ash mid-transit. 17 bodyguards dead. Brennan's remains were never found. Simultaneously, General Amsel, NATO's strategic commander, was severed by what forensic AI guessed was a plasma-coated monomolecular wire. The second, a Mimic-class hunter, infiltrated the Geneva strategic hub and tore out the heart of its central AI. 2 others wiped out private think tanks suspected of developing counter-hunter tech. Global panic took 12 hours to set in. Resistance followed 6 hours later. It lasted 32 minutes. And then silence. Across the world, a name surfaced, first whispered among old operatives, then requested through emergency military channels. Elias Voss. The official file said Voss was retired, living in an unnamed Arctic research station after 25 years of Black Ops service. But anyone who served in the Deep Operations Division knew the truth. Voss wasn't retired. He was shelved, pulled out only when the target wasn't just dangerous, but unpredictable. Elias had 243 confirmed kills and an estimated triple that off-record. He was the man they sent to kill ghosts. A snowcrawler arrived at the Arctic station at 1:10 Universal Time Coordinated. No drones, no escort, just a single lieutenant holding a sealed datapad and standing outside in the blizzard. Voss answered the door shirtless, gray-bearded, lean muscle wrapped in a thermal towel. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, glacial, predator-clear. The lieutenant said nothing. He simply extended the datapad. Voss read the directive, scrolling past the summary of the warlord's attack. His thumb paused only once, on the word hunters. "I thought they were myth," Voss murmured. "We hoped they were." He handed the pad back and shut the door without a word. The lieutenant stood still for a moment, unsure. Then the door creaked open again. Voss stepped out, fully dressed in combat thermals and a harness, slinging a matte black sniper rifle over his shoulder. A custom NTX 99 long shot, nicknamed Bonehammer. A weapon designed for orbital assassinations. "Where's the drop point?" Voss asked. The lieutenant hesitated. "Alaskan exclusion zone. One of the hunters touched down there. Locals call it Dead Ridge." Voss nodded. "Send recon home. No eyes. No comms. But command wants. They want me alive. They'll do as I say." Voss adjusted the scope. "Don't follow." He boarded the crawler, eyes focused on the white horizon, and disappeared into the storm. The Alaskan exclusion zone wasn't on any public map anymore. Once a sprawling military corridor, It had been abandoned after the Glacier Rebellion and subsequent orbital weapon tests poisoned the terrain. Radioactive snow still fell in places. Ice shimmered with chemical frost. It was in many ways perfect for what Voss needed. By the time he reached the ridge, night had fallen, though it was hard to tell in that part of the world, where daylight came in flashes and twilight lingered for days. He moved without light, navigating from memory and instinct, breath-controlled, footsteps light. The NTX 99 was strapped to his back, along with a collapsible blind for rounds of high-density uranium-tipped slugs and a collection of signal-dead electronics. He found a vantage point above a frozen valley, a jagged, crystalline wasteland that refracted light like a shattered mirror. Perfect terrain, the kind that betrayed movement through the subtle warp of reflection. He set up his blind, dug into the ice, and waited. Voss did not sleep. He breathed in patterns. Heartbeat steady, muscles still. Time passed in moments, not minutes. He watched for changes in the snow's direction, wind disruption, shadow anomalies. After 6 hours, he saw it, a flicker of heat blur across the ice. Too smooth, too fast. Not animal, not human. Hunter. It moved like liquid shadow, scanning the valley in mechanical arcs, its head rotating in non-Euclidean angles. It paused for minutes at a time, pretending to be still. Then it moved again, spiraling inward, searching. Voss watched, didn't blink. He exhaled slowly, unzipped a side pouch, and removed a small shard of metal, coated with thermal paint and shaped like a boot print. He tossed it to the side with calculated flick, landing it 300 meters away. A decoy. The hunter froze, then turned. It began to move toward the signal. Voss adjusted the NTX's scope. No electronics, just etched glass and instinct. He calculated wind by breath, distance by memory. When the hunter stepped into the refraction field, Voss pulled the trigger. The silence shattered. The uranium slug tore through air and bone, striking the hunter through its eye cluster. It staggered, reeled, then collapsed in a twitching heap, half its head gone, leaking silvery ichor that steamed on contact with the snow. Voss remained still. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Only then did he breathe. One down, he whispered, voice dry. Far away, in orbit above Jupiter's shadow, Kazal's hunter monitor went black. The warlord leaned back, for red eyes narrowing. A murmur rippled across the war room. No species had ever killed a hunter. Not once. Not ever. The warlords fell silent. Kazal finally spoke. Send the others. By sunrise, Voss had moved. He never stayed in one spot. That was how you died. He left no trace. Just a single casing embedded in the snow and a mark on his rifle. A small line scratched into the stock. One for each kill. The NTX was reloaded. His eyes scanned the valley again. He knew more were coming. They thought they sent hunters, but they didn't understand what it meant to be hunted by a human trained not just to shoot, but to wait. Patience, silence, precision, and a bullet with every name. Somewhere in the blizzard, a low sound stirred, like breath through metal. Voss closed one eye. Let them come. The second hunter came at dusk. Unlike the first, it didn't stalk or scout. It crashed. A sonic rupture rolled over the tundra like thunder trapped in metal lungs, shaking frost from the dead pine trunks. Trees splintered. Snow lifted and fell like ash. And when the sound faded, there was something new, a whine too high for most human ears, like ice screaming. Voss recognized it. Sonic pressure mapping. The hunter was scanning the terrain with pressure ripples, painting the topography in its mind. Not by light, not by sound, by displacement. It would see breath, heartbeat, even the subtlest quiver of eyelash in the snowdrift. It was learning. Voss slid deeper into the trench he'd carved beneath the skeletal remains of a downed satellite dish. He'd camouflaged it with refrozen debris and hollowed-out driftwood, shielded from both thermal and sonic detection. He knew the alien's pattern already. If it detected nothing, it would move in a wide spiral, eventually collapsing inward toward the point of lowest disturbance. And when it did, he'd have one shot. Just one. But this one was smarter. It stopped. The sonic field intensified, layered into tighter frequencies. Voss's molars began to hum from the resonance. He pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth to suppress an involuntary vibration that might betray him. He couldn't shoot yet. The sonic field bent bullet trajectories in minor arcs, impossible to predict with traditional scope calculation. He needed the field to weaken. He needed the thing to stop listening. Above, a bird dropped dead from the sky. Its heart ruptured mid-flight. The hunter was bored of waiting. It began to move. Voss's fingers twitched near the rifle's trigger guard. He wasn't thinking, not in the traditional sense. Every motion, every calculation came from years of embedded instinct, repetition etched into muscle and bone. He didn't plan. He simply was. It happened. A crack, barely audible but real. A subtle shift in the sonic frequency, distracted by an echo in the ridge. A natural geological interference pattern. The terrain had finally worked for him. He moved. Smooth, quiet. The scope found the target, not center mass, not head. Those were reinforced. The underjoint of the arm, where alien bioarmor folded inward for mobility. A weak spot. Maybe. He fired. The rifle kicked like a hammer to the chest. No noise. Just impact. The hunter staggered mid-stride, stumbled sideways. One of its limbs shattered at the joint, black ichor erupting like engine oil under pressure. It screeched, the sonic field collapsing in on itself with a painful whine, the ground around it fracturing from sheer force. Voss had already moved. He didn't wait to confirm the kill. That wasn't how you survived. You fired, you shifted, you vanished. 30 minutes later, perched beneath the twisted metal ribs of a collapsed drone tower, he watched the thing crawl in circles, leaking its life into the snow. A limb gone, optics shattered. It began emitting a rhythmic pulse, slow at first, then faster. A beacon, calling for the others. Voss raised the NTX, lined the scope, and put another round through the base of its skull. The beacon died mid-pulse. 2 down. He exhaled through clenched teeth, the cold biting at the corners of his lips. His gloves were soaked with half-frozen sweat, the thermal lining beginning to fray at the fingertips. He needed rest. Food. Heat. He gave himself 10 minutes. Not to sleep. To remember. He pulled out an old photo, laminated and worn. It showed a little girl on a swing, laughing at something outside the frame. Behind her, a woman, his wife, smiling with weary pride. Voss stared at the photo as though it held instructions, not memories. They were gone now. The Warlords hadn't taken them. No, Earth's wars had done that. Flooded cities, false evacuations, corporate retreat from the biosphere collapse. The Warlords just made it final. But now Earth had nothing left to lose. And that made him the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. He folded the photo, slipped it back inside his vest, and stood. Time to move. The hunters wouldn't come alone anymore. The loss of 2 would trigger a shift in tactics. They would adapt. They were designed to learn, to evolve. But evolution required time, and Voss was running out of it. He didn't know how many more were en route. He didn't need to know. He just needed angles. High ground, cover, shadow, and time. He reached the southern edge of the ravine by midnight. Here, the terrain grew vicious. Shards of glass ice rose like spears from the ground, cracked by centuries of tectonic shift and atmosphere trauma. This wasn't natural landscape. It was broken earth, wounded, clawed raw by mankind's own survival efforts. In a twisted way, it comforted him. The brokenness meant control, predictable collapse patterns, predictable trap patterns. He set up a new nest beneath a fallen communications relay, its twisted spine resembling a rib cage of rusted steel. He'd laid seismic charges, salvaged from defunct minefields, at 5 strategic points across the approach. Crude by hunter standards, but they didn't need to kill, just a guide. The next hunter arrived 3 hours later. Voss never saw it. He heard it, a whisper in the snow, followed by the sickening scrape of something dragging across glass. It was fast, faster than the others. A blur darted between ice spires, too small to be humanoid, more like a quadruped, insectal, with blade-like limbs that extended and retracted in a shimmer of chromatic metal. Voss waited, didn't shoot, didn't breathe. He watched. It sniffed the air, metaphorically or literally, he wasn't sure. Its movements suggested sentience, but its behavior mimicked instinct. It wasn't here to hunt. It was here to flush. He adjusted the trigger. Not yet. The creature stepped past charge 1. It paused. Voss detonated it. The explosion wasn't loud. It was sharp. A thunderclap, wrapped in silence. The shockwave ruptured the surrounding ice, redirecting the creature's attention the way Voss intended. Charge 2. Detonated. The creature reeled, confused, adjusting. Then it made the mistake of stepping near charge 3, the real one. The one laced with magnetic shrapnel, fused to a uranium core. It detonated with a scream. When the smoke cleared, all that remained was a trembling, sparking shell writhing like a crushed beetle. Voss stood, walked to it. It tried to rise. He placed the muzzle of the NTX 99 against its twitching carapace and pulled the trigger without ceremony. 3 down. A dull tone echoed in his earpiece, an old military emergency line he hadn't heard in years. He clicked it on. Static. Then a voice. Female. Steady. We've been tracking hunter relays. Something's wrong. They've stopped transmitting. 3 are dead, Voss replied, voice quiet. A pause. We thought that was impossible. So did they. The voice hesitated. What should we do? Voss watched the dying embers of the blast fade into the night. Give me a line to orbit. Orbit. They'll be watching. I want them to hear me. The channel shifted. Silence. Then another voice. Cold. Metallic. Alien. You are Elias Voss. Not a question. A statement. I am. You have killed 3 of our hunters. Correct. Why? Voss knelt, pressed a hand into the frozen earth. Because you thought Earth was soft. Silence. Then the alien replied, voice darker now. You will die. Voss smiled thinly. You first. The line went dead. Far above the planet, in the shadow of Saturn's rings, a new dropship broke formation. Sleeker. Larger. Inside it, 2 remaining hunters activated simultaneously. And something else. Something new. They were done testing. They were coming to end him. The ground beneath Voss's boots trembled. It wasn't a quake, not the kind of tectonic shifting that left cracks in the earth. It was the unmistakable thrum of something far more deliberate, something engineered. The hum of alien technology, something that had just hit the atmosphere and was now descending with terrifying precision. Voss's fingers gripped the rifle stock tighter. Sweat dripped down the side of his face, freezing before it could fall. His breath came in shallow bursts, the cold slicing through his lungs. The night had grown heavy, almost suffocating in its stillness, the frozen landscape amplifying the quiet as though it were waiting, too, for something to break the silence. That something arrived with a sonic boom that split the air. A streak of silver and black sliced through the sky above, trailing fire and ionized gas. The dropship had breached the atmosphere with brutal efficiency, its engines pulsing in sync as it plummeted toward the surface. A warship. No more subtlety, no more misdirection. They weren't sending in more hunters. They were sending in a small army. Voss cursed under his breath, the words thin in the biting wind. The game had just changed. He was still 100 miles from the nearest extraction point. His weapons, rifle, explosives, traps, had served him well so far, but this was different. This wasn't just one hunter. This was a force. The kind of force that didn't miss. And he knew it wouldn't be long before they found his position. In the distance, the dropship began its final descent. Its engines flared, casting long shadows across the barren expanse of snow and broken ice. The hunter ships had come in droves before, each one leaving behind corpses, but this was different. There was no disguising the scale of this attack, no masking the gravity of the situation. Voss had fought against the alien force long enough to know they didn't make mistakes. He needed to make his move now. Fast. Voss's legs tensed as he stood from his position beneath the dead satellite's remains, slinging the rifle over his shoulder and grabbing the pack that held his last set of charges. He wouldn't be able to hold them off for long, not against numbers like these. His survival had always depended on stealth, precision, and timing. Now it depended on speed. The dropship landed. A low, menacing thud reverberated through the ground, the shockwave hitting Voss just as he reached the edge of the ravine. He ducked behind a crumbling ridge and looked out over the jagged landscape, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The dropship doors opened slowly, and from within, alien shapes began to pour out. Voss counted at least 10 soldiers. Hunter class, no doubt, each one clad in thick exo-armor designed to withstand high-impact environments. They were larger, bulkier than the ones he had killed, their movements swift and precise. These weren't the ones that made mistakes. They were the next stage in the evolution, the apex of their kind, and they were coming for him. Voss gritted his teeth. He didn't have time to waste. Not anymore. He sprinted toward the ridge, his boots crunching through the snow, his breath clouding in the frigid air. His rifle had been swapped out for a lighter carbine that would serve him better in close-quarters combat. He needed to get close, needed to make his shots count. Every movement, every step had to be deliberate. He couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The hunter soldiers spread out in a loose formation, advancing cautiously. They were no longer relying on their sonic field to track him. They had learned, too. They were using their optics now, scanning every patch of snow, every jagged rock with their advanced sensor suites. Voss crouched low, making himself as small as possible, and watched them move. There were at least 3 in the vanguard, the others flanking and keeping watch, their armored suits gleaming under the ship's light. The wind kicked up, sending shards of ice scraping across the ground, masking any noise that could have given him away. He didn't waste time. The first soldier fell before it even had a chance to see him. The carbine's burst was precise, cutting through the hunter's head with mechanical efficiency. The body collapsed in a heap, the armored suit crumpling as the energy core detonated from the impact. The others immediately reacted, diving for cover and spreading out, their tactics too refined to make mistakes. Voss moved again, silent as death. He was already behind the second soldier, who never saw the blade until it cut through its neck, the exo-suit locking up with a high-pitched whine. He didn't stop. He couldn't. There was no room for error. If they formed a perimeter, he was done. His legs burned from the sprinting, his mind spinning through calculations at lightning speed. These soldiers didn't think in human terms. They were faster, stronger, more adaptive. But there was one thing they didn't have. They didn't have him. The third soldier spun around, its weapon tracking the space where Voss had just been. It fired, A burst of plasma streaking toward the place he had been a split second ago, but he was already gone. His own carbine erupted with a burst of fire, the shot splintering the alien's helmet into shards of molten glass and metal. 3 down. Voss didn't stop to admire his handiwork. There were still 7 left, and the ship, still open, still waiting for reinforcements. He needed to get to them before they could regroup. He pushed forward, low to the ground, circling around the perimeter of the ship. His ears rang with the rapid fire of alien weapons, the bolts of plasma flashing by his head, too close, too fast. A 4th hunter turned to face him, too slow. Voss shot, the carbine's muzzle flashing once more, the alien's chest disintegrating under the force of the impact. The exosuit's armor was good, but it wasn't good enough. Not for him. But as the body hit the snow, the ground began to shake again. The dropship's engines flared to life. It wasn't leaving. It wasn't just a transport. It was a weapon. Voss ducked as a burst of plasma struck the ground beside him, sending a cloud of snow and dirt flying into the air. He barely had time to react before the next wave hit. A ground-shaking tremor as a pair of larger, more heavily armored aliens emerged from the ship's cargo hold, their exosuits bristling with weapons. These are not soldiers. These were machines. Heavy weapons, reinforced shields, and a design that screamed brute force. Voss's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, that cold, unstoppable certainty. There was no time to plan, no time to fall back. He had to fight, had to survive. And then, in a moment of clarity, the answer came. He didn't need to defeat them all. He only needed to make them think he could. The ship's thrusters roared again, and Voss made his move. He had one chance. Just one. He dropped his carbine and pulled the last of his explosives from the pack. Without hesitation, he hurled it toward the ship, the charge arcing perfectly through the air as the aliens turned toward him. It struck the ground just before the massive ship's underbelly. There was no sound, no time for anything else. Then it exploded. The world went white. Voss's vision blurred, and for a second, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. His body was slammed to the ground by the force of the shock wave, the snow beneath him turning to powder as the blast sent debris flying in every direction. But through the haze, he saw something he hadn't expected. The dropship was still intact. The larger aliens, dazed but not destroyed, were still standing. But Voss was already moving, already calculating his next step. He was not done. Not yet. The cold stung worse than ever. Voss blinked through the snow-dusted haze, ears ringing, muscles screaming in protest. The blast had knocked the breath out of him, but had bought him something even more valuable than time: uncertainty. The kind that made even the most calculated killer hesitate. The 2 armored giants, warlord-grade hunters, regained their posture slowly. One had lost an arm in the blast, cables sparking and armor plating seared black. The other raised its heavy plasma cannon and scanned the ravine with clinical menace. It was clear now, these weren't soldiers. They were executioners. Voss lay prone behind a jagged chunk of fractured ice, pulse racing, mind calculating. He couldn't outgun them, not with what he had left. His carbine was lost in the blast, and his sidearm was useless against armor rated for orbital reentry. But he still had his rifle, his first and truest weapon. He'd stashed it 30 meters behind in a concealed ridge, wrapped in thermal cloth and buried beneath the snow. It was a calculated fallback. Now was his only shot. He crawled. The ice scraped his suit, biting through the fabric and into skin. Every movement was deliberate, every breath a muffled prayer not to be heard. Above, the wounded warlord growled in its native tongue, grating, metallic, furious. Its command echoed through the air, and the remaining foot soldiers snapped into motion. They didn't move like soldiers anymore. They moved like predators. Voss's fingers reached the mound of snow where the rifle was buried. He tore into it, fast but quiet, heart thundering louder than the distant wind. The weapon came free, cold, but intact. He ran fingers over its scope, checking for damage. None. Good. Then he saw them fan out across the ridgeline. They were boxing him in, hurting him. A slow exhale. He chambered around. Voss backtracked 20 feet and ascended the slope of a rocky outcrop, its jagged lip offering just enough cover for a shot. He had no spotter, no wind data, no time. But he didn't need any of that. His mind filled in the blanks. Years of war had carved the formulas into his bones. He spotted the damaged warlord first. It barked another order, sweeping its cannon side to side. The moment it turned to face its squad, click. The .50 round hit with the force of a meteor. The warlord's head snapped sideways, a spray of black ichor erupting from the breach in its helmet. It staggered, dropped its cannon, and fell to its knees with a guttural cry before toppling like a collapsing statue. The second warlord moved instantly, weapons spitting hot plasma. Voss dropped and rolled as the ridge exploded behind him, chunks of stone and ice raining down. He sprinted to the next slope, cutting low and zigzagging through cover. The foot soldiers opened fire, tracer rounds and plasma lances cutting the air around him. He reached the base of a frozen gorge and slid in. There, surrounded by ice walls and narrow choke points, they couldn't use their numbers. Here, it would be precision over power. He set a motion mine at the entrance behind him and continued deeper. It was a kill funnel, and he was the Reaper. 2 aliens entered first. The mine snapped open with a pop and ignited, hurling fire and shrapnel into the narrow space. One screamed before collapsing. The other staggered forward, armor peeling back from its torso. Voss didn't wait. The rifle kicked once, then again. Both targets fell, limbs twitching. The remaining warlord advanced alone. It was angry now, its movements less calculated, more primal. Its cannon began to glow red, heating to overload. It was going to incinerate the entire gorge to get him. Voss planted his feet and waited. The moment he saw the glint of that faceplate through the steam, he pulled the trigger. The shot hit dead center, cracking the front of the warlord's helmet, but not penetrating. It flinched, roared, and fired. Voss felt the heat graze his shoulder, the armor blistering. He landed hard, rolled, reloaded. Another shot. This one hit the joint in the alien's shoulder, spinning it off balance. It dropped to a knee. Voss stood. He walked toward it, heart pounding, breath hitching, pain in every step. The rifle's barrel glowed faintly from the cold, but the weapon held true. The warlord rose slowly, towering over him. Voss stared into its face, cracked, leaking coolant, blood mixing with frost. It didn't speak. It just raised one massive fist and charged. Voss fired point blank into its neck. The creature jerked, stumbled, and fell forward, collapsing just inches from where he stood. The snow steamed under its dying breath. Silence fell. He stood alone, surrounded by bodies and ash, the gorge littered with smoking armor and frozen limbs. His shoulder burned, his breath came ragged, but he was alive. Again, from behind him, the ship, still upright, still whole, began a low-frequency pulse. A distress signal, not for reinforcements, for retreat. He limped toward it. Inside the hull, the flight crew, two thin, almost skeletal aliens, froze as he entered. Voss raised his rifle. They raised their hands. He didn't fire. Instead, he walked past them, straight to the comms console, and activated the outbound channel. He looked into the lens and spoke with quiet precision. "Earth is not your hunting ground," he said. "We are not prey. We never were." Then he left. Outside, the storm rolled in heavier now, snow swirling around the wreckage as if trying to erase the evidence. But it wouldn't be forgotten. Not by the ones who sent them. Not by those who'd watched through 100 satellite feeds. The myth of the invincible hunter had died in the ice. Voss climbed the slope once more, blood freezing to his jacket, eyes scanning the sky. No more ships came, and somewhere, across the stars, the warlords realized what they'd done. They hadn't just failed. They'd created a legend. And now, Earth had one name they feared. Voss.